On Central Illinois on the Record, a sit-down with the governor. Top legislative leaders talk about the budget after going months without a meeting. Plus, how Central Illinois is prepared to handle a mass casualty event. And while global climate change talks are underway in France, we look at what's being done at home to reduce carbon emissions.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. It's been 159 days without a budget, but progress is being made. Governor Rauner sat down with the Republican and Democratic leaders of the House and Senate. It was their first meeting since May. It lasted about an hour and a half, 30 minutes in public, the rest behind closed doors. The bar appeared to be set low for this initial session.
The fact that we had a meeting is the most important thing that happened today, and an agreement to have another one next week, which is progress.
But was it? When a private budget meeting between all four legislative leaders and the governor ended in less than an hour, Republicans say the problem wasn't a lack of meetings, but when there are discussions, they say Democrats either don't participate or aren't being honest.
The problem we experience is when there is a meeting, at least the speaker says nothing, the Senate president talks a lot, and some of what he says is different out here than in there.
Speaker Michael Madigan defended his silence in Tuesday's meeting.
That when you talk, you don't learn. And my purpose today was to listen to learn.
In the public portion of the meeting, it was the same story. Madigan accused Rauner of focusing on extreme, non-budget issues.
The governor's advocacy of these non-budget issues, workers' compensation, collective bargaining, prevailing wage, run contrary to the core beliefs of both Democrats and Republicans.
Rauner differed, saying many of the reforms proposed have been passed by other states. He doubled down on the local control portion of his property tax plan, which could limit collective bargaining for unions.
But the other key to getting a handle on our property taxes is to give local control of government costs.
That was Matt Porter reporting. Now, Governor Rauner was the only person in the meeting who did not address the media afterwards, despite saying he would. As for when we might see an actual budget bill, the Senate president said nothing is likely to be taken up until the new year. But a bipartisan bill is freeing up millions of dollars for services across the state. The proposal would give local governments and lottery winners their money. The bill had passed the Senate and now the House, but it has additions. Some of those add-ons include $18 million for domestic violence shelters and $10 million going to the Secretary of State's office. That comes from the General Revenue Fund, not tax dollars collected by the state. The governor applauded the House's efforts, but when it comes down to funding for higher education and state-run programs, there are no answers. Because lawmakers are in continuous session, 71 votes are necessary to pass a bill. When lawmakers return to regular session next month, bills can be passed with a simple majority.
This time, so far, we've taken an extra 5 months, but on a pro rata basis, or based upon the size of the problem and the deficit, it wouldn't be surprising if it doesn't go for a few more months. It's kind of the nature of the political process here in this building.
Rauner says he's willing to temporarily raise taxes, but the state needs structural reforms. Local political experts are not expecting a resolution to the budget crisis anytime soon. Illinois State University Assistant Professor Carl Palmer says the Republicans and Democrats have no incentive to cooperate right now because there's no election until next year. But he believes it's going to keep getting worse until the state has no other option but to pass a budget.
We have people in government that aren't paying attention to the needs of the people, and the longer they let this go on without coming to some form of compromise, I mean, they're going to hurt people, and hopefully there will be some electoral repercussions for them down the road.
Palmer says he's not sure what the breaking point is, but it has to be coming soon. The state has already seen its credit rating go down, and schools like Illinois State University are left wondering about their own budgets. Former inmates are being brought back to court so the state can sue them for the cost of their incarceration. State law allows lawsuits to target offenders who have earned or come into money through an inheritance or trust fund. The number of lawsuits jumped from 2 each in 2012 and 2013 to 11 in the first 10 months of this year. The Chicago Tribune reports of 31 prisoners or parolees sued since 2010, money was collected from 11. Some say this could prompt a change in that law.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised in the next session of the legislature next spring that this law might be revisited, because it does raise some moral issues of whether this is the right thing to do.
The state has recovered more than $500,000 since 2010. Most of that money was from 2 inmates. Drivers in Illinois may be able to show their license on their smartphones in the near future. The Secretary of State says it's looking into bids from various companies to see if it will be beneficial. Our Emily Fannin tells us how some people see the positives and negatives of having a digital ID.
We've all heard it before. There's an app for that. Smartphone users can use their phone for almost anything, from paying bills and watching TV. But what if there was an app for your driver's license?
Moving it into the electronic arena does certainly present challenges.
The Secretary of State's office created a task force to see if implementing an app would be beneficial or just a hassle.
Really, for something like this to work, you need national standards. If you have one state that implements a digital driver's license, what happens to their constituents when they go to another state?
The e-card would contain the same information as a driver's license. Spokesman for the Secretary of State's office, Henry Haupt, says there's still a lot of research to be done.
I think it could be a little problem because I kind of figure if one state's going to do it, the other states need to do it too.
Haupt says creating an app can run into security issues or the possibility of your phone being stolen.
Our job is to make sure that our driver's license and ID cards that we issue to our citizens are secure.
Say you get pulled over and your phone's dead. That's what some people think is an issue when relying on an app to keep your identification.
I kind of like the whole having a card as an ID because if your phone gets lost or whatever, that could pretty much screw you over.
Right now, the task force is in its beginning stages. Haupt says the task force is weighing on their options.
And it gives us an opportunity, of course, to stay abreast on the issues and to ensure that we have all the information that we need.
If lawmakers pass the measure, a digital license could be used during traffic stops or wherever a driver's license is required as a form of identification. The election to choose a state representative for the 73rd District is not until next year, but Peoria City Councilman Ryan Spain is already in campaign mode. However, the married father of one still has to keep up his council duties, family life, and his full-time job. We spoke to him about the balancing act.
You're juggling 3 full-time jobs, a real job, all of our duties for serving on the city council, which I know all of our members take very seriously and put a lot of time into, and then running a campaign as well. But you know what you're getting into when you pursue these type of opportunities.
Spain is running to fill the seat currently held by Republican David Leach. The 73rd District Representative is retiring when his current term ends. A chance to clear the air, what veterans had to say about their health care. But first, responding to mass casualties, how Central Illinois is preparing for disaster. Officer-related shootings continue to cause heated debate across the country over whether they're justified. The Peoria County Sheriff's Office hosted a workshop to break down the specifics of why officers make the decisions they do. Looking at a video in hindsight can make it easy to think about all of the things that might have been done differently. But the Sheriff's Department says split-second decisions aren't easy. The workshop at Illinois Central College talked about where police get their authority, what kind of training they receive, and how the body reacts in stressful situations. Police want you to understand why certain situations unfold the way they do.
It's an opportunity for the citizens and the police to get together, have a discussion about use of force incidents, really come to understand why did the officer react in this particular, what was it that drove the officer to make this type of a decision.
Captain Gay says the department has held similar workshops in the past and they have always received a positive response. It might be surprising to some, but OSF St. Francis Medical Center has a disaster preparedness warehouse in Bartonville. Every day, people are being trained across central Illinois and parts of western Illinois to be ready for anything that creates mass casualties. As Hannah Hilliard explains, the facilities director says there is a catch when it comes to preparedness.
Are we prepared? I want to say yes, but there's always variables, right? You know.
But that hasn't stopped Troy Urbantrout from training anyone and everyone. He is the Disaster Preparedness Manager with OSF St. Francis Medical Center, which is also the Central Illinois hub for disaster training.
A lot of times when you see about disasters, all you really see is where the disaster happened and the damage that it caused, but all those people that were injured or hurt went somewhere. We're that somewhere.
Sometimes that somewhere is straight to the site. Within the preparedness warehouse are stretchers, traveling emergency rooms, oxygen tanks, generators. And he says they practice using it all with special training and drills like the one they did this past September in a collaborative effort with agencies throughout the county.
We crashed a plane out by Caterpillar, you know, which put an influx of patients in the hospital. So that's how you kind of train.
But it never stops.
You write a good plan and you look at it, you think this is the greatest thing, then you go test it the first time and you find out that you're like, well, hey, what about this? And you're like, oh yeah, so you start over.
Urbantrout says they adjust training and scenarios based on real events like Sandy Hook and Wednesday's San Bernardino shooting. But to say Central Illinois is 100% ready for any disaster?
The thing about preparedness is you're never prepared.
Urbantrout says when responding to an event like San Bernardino, the first 15 minutes belong solely to law enforcement attempting to stop that threat. A threatening note is left at a Planned Parenthood office in Champaign last week. It comes days after a mass shooting at a local clinic in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Locations across the country are stepping up security in response. Planned Parenthood says whenever a threat is made, it immediately contacts police to evaluate the credibility.
The safety of our patients and our staff is our highest priority at Planned Parenthood. We will continue to relook at everything and make sure that if any improvements are needed, we're always looking to improve things.
This year, an office in Effingham was smeared with hateful graffiti, while another in Aurora dealt with an arson attempt. The organization says the attacks have not kept people from visiting the clinics. Putting a tax on the backs of small businesses, while lawmakers are targeting advertising to avoid it. Up next, world leaders discussing climate change, how their talks in Paris could impact Central Illinois.
You're watching Central Illinois on the record.
Paris continues to recover from recent terror attacks, but the city is also at the center of the global debate on climate change. Our Rachel Kay met with a professor of international studies at Bradley University to talk about the ongoing climate conference. Rachel, what does this mean for Central Illinois?
Well, Paul, the conference started on Monday, and one of the main goals is to set standards for carbon emissions around the world. Each country, including the U.S., is making pledges as to what they realistically can do.
Basically, carbon dioxide is the very basis for our economic well-being. And so if you limit that, if you hold countries to emissions reductions, that's going to have very real costs on very real people.
The goal of COP21, the 21st Conference of the Parties, is to find a balance between environment and economics. But if this is the 21st meeting, what makes this year different?
Basically, there's even more evidence that global climate change is a problem currently, will continue to be a problem, will get much worse.
Jeannie Bukowski, an associate professor of international studies at Bradley University, says President Obama and Chinese President Xi, leaders of the two highest carbon-emitting countries, are both willing to agree to binding commitments.
The United States is pledging what the current administration thinks is politically feasible, right, even with the change of administration.
Our pledge is to reduce carbon emissions by 26 to 28% by the year 2025. But making that happen could eventually mean some local changes, good and bad.
We could all be impacted by stricter emission standards on cars. Maybe this would mean that our cars would cost more.
There could also be a loss of jobs if places like coal-fired power plants shut down. Bukowski says that's the short-term view. Long-term, there's potential for job creation.
Caterpillar's a traditional industry, but they're certainly doing a lot of alternative, research into alternative fuels and more fuel-efficient standards.
The conference is also focused on the long-term environmental impacts: sea level rise, unlivable temperatures, spread of diseases, and changes in crop availability.
We may see changes in patterns in terms of what you can actually grow in Illinois. What are the costs going to be if we have the impacts of climate change that are predicted? And those costs could be massive.
The conference goes until Friday of this week. If the result is a treaty, that will have to go through the Senate before the U.S. can sign. Bukowski says she doesn't see it passing if that's the case. But if the result is an accord or some other type of agreement, the United States is likely to commit. Paul?
Thanks, Rachel. Thousands of families are in danger of being left in the cold this winter. That's because LIHEAP money that help families heat their homes and pay for electrical bills could run out. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program is asking legislators to appropriate $40 million in special funds for the program. It's been on hold due to the budget impasse.
Dangerous means of keeping themselves warm this winter. And yet, we have at least $40 million of state LIHEAP funds that are sitting idle in an account.
And so we're making an appeal. Our ask is for our legislators to come together to release those funds so that we don't face a situation where we will have a loss of lives.
Without this funding, it would leave 150,000 families without energy assistance. Still ahead, Donald Trump threatens to skip the next presidential debate, how CNN is responding to the threat. But first, caring for veterans in Central Illinois, how the healthcare industry is responding to concerns.
You're watching Central Illinois on the record.
Congress is sending President Obama a bill that will fund transportation for the next 5 years. Senator Dick Durbin is part of a group that was tasked with finding a compromise between the House and Senate versions of the bill. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act intends to help plan road and bridge projects, among other work, and create jobs.
80% of our highway construction comes from federal funds. That's money we pay when we buy a gallon of gas and send the federal gas tax back to Washington. Well, it's coming back to Illinois, and I'm glad it is. It means we're going to have a lot of good work on highways and buses and mass transit. We're also going to create a lot of good jobs.
The act, nicknamed FAST, is the first long-term highway funding bill in a decade. It will provide $281 billion for roads. About $7.5 billion will come to Illinois.
We do this with CNN. I won't do the debate unless they pay me $5 million, all of which money goes to the wounded warriors or go to vets. Seriously. I would love to do it.
Now, it's not the first time Donald Trump has threatened to pull out of a debate. Trump made the comments at a campaign stop in Macon, Georgia, not far from Atlanta and CNN's headquarters. CNN has since said it will not be paying Trump for his appearance. Veterans health care has been in the national spotlight since controversy erupted in Arizona over delayed care and falsified wait time information at a VA hospital. Now, veterans in Central Illinois had an opportunity this past week to have questions answered and concerns addressed. WMVD's Shane Gustafson sat down on that town hall.
Inhumane, cruel, didn't care, didn't give me service. Give me rhetoric.
Steve Bowling has had many issues dealing with veterans' health care since coming home from Vietnam.
This bothers me that these young guys have to deal with the 30 years jumping through hoops to achieve getting what belongs to them.
But Illiana Healthcare is trying to change that. It held a town hall forum in Bartonville Wednesday to respond to these concerns.
This is a way for us to be upfront and personal with our veterans, to find out what some of the issues are. And
veterans use the time to talk about the challenges they face when they visit the doctor, especially at the Danville Clinic. They say it's had its share of problems.
What's the time frame of backlog?
And some of the conversations became heated, but VA leaders say that's the point.
we're always open to any kind of suggestions or comments. And what we find when we have these Veterans Town Hall is we haven't really addressed the issues. We haven't really gotten to the root of it.
Getting to the root of the problem is the goal of these meetings. Illiana Health has had 6 of them, each time hoping to learn more about how it can help.
It's very important to hear from our veterans. A lot of times we get compliments, we get some complaints.
Illiana Health tells me the compliments are increasing.
Now they're much faster, they're much quicker.
And while these meetings are leading to changes, Illiana Health says it realizes the work is not complete.
They served our country, and so they deserve the best care.
Most of the people at the meeting were veterans, but other care agencies were present as well. All say veterans health care is a priority. The Capitol is lit. We'll tell you for how long you can see the lights in D.C. But first, lawmakers in Springfield take action to prevent attacks. Why they say they're standing up for small business. Illinois continues to look at new ways to bring in money, but some state leaders are making sure small businesses aren't the ones footing the bill. As Kelsey Gibbs explains, legislators are trying to stop a potential tax on advertisements.
We've been in business for 75 years.
Ace Sign Company is a small business with big ideas.
Create signs and branding and images for other business that will allow them to grow their businesses.
Like many companies, Bringett says he relies heavily on advertising, and an added tax to ads will put a dent in their bottom line.
There's a lot of existing burdens and taxes that businesses are all faced with now. Perhaps there are other ideas that could raise more revenue.
That's why lawmakers are getting ahead of the curve and trying to stop this from potentially happening. Nearly 70 House members in the No Ad Tax Coalition introduced a bill opposing a new advertising tax in the state.
Add an additional cost to something that is already kind of sacred to the small business is really detrimental.
Victoria Ringer helps many small businesses in Springfield. She says a new tax could cause businesses to close.
The first thing that they have to cut is advertising. So when they have advertising dollars, it's really important to them to make that part of their communication.
Bringett says he's happy to see people standing up for small businesses.
Making sure that something that would be detrimental does not happen.
The Rauner administration says it does not support any type of tax on advertisement at this time. Caterpillar's top executive is the new chairman of the Business Roundtable. CEO Doug Oberhelman joined the Washington, D.C. trade group in 2010. The organization works with businesses and political leaders across the country. Oberhelman will serve a 2-year term as chairman, working on policies critical to Caterpillar and U.S. businesses. And House Speaker Paul Ryan lights the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree this past week. This year's tree came from Alaska. It's the first Capitol Christmas tree from Alaska since the tradition began in 1964. The 74-foot Lutz spruce traveled 4,000 miles by land and sea to Washington, D.C. It features thousands of ornaments made by kids and others in Alaska. The tree will be lit each day from sundown to 11 p.m. through January 1st. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can stay in touch with us using social media, connect with WMVD and me on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMVD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.